Hey, what is up, my beautiful people? Week 11 of the college football season. We are cruising right through. I'm Lauren Sisler with AL.com. We want to thank our sponsors. Keep Alabama beautiful. We love our beautiful state, so keep it beautiful. And to join us now, our new, awesome colleague, Nubias Wilburn. Of course, Nubias has been with us a few weeks now. He's covered a few games, but his first trip to Texas A&M, I just want to get your thoughts because I know you've been covering college football for a good bit, but haven't gotten to scour the SEC just yet. But Texas A&M, one of your first experiences there in the SEC. Just your overall thoughts on what you thought of College Station and the 12th man.
Ooh, buddy, they take themselves very, very seriously out there at College Station. 109,000 people. They said it was the second largest crowd in school history, and it felt like it. It was a lot of people. The stadium rocked. Listen, I've been to Wisconsin, and that press box shakes up there when they do the jump around. Obviously, I covered Penn State for a couple of seasons, and that press box will shake a little bit. It felt like that thing was rocking the whole game. I mean, my goodness, I thought I was going to get seasick for a second there. It's like you can feel the vibrate. It's like if you're riding like in an old school, let's say old school 79 Buick Chevelle or something, or a Cadillac or something like that, and you got the knockers in the back. That's what it felt like sitting in that stadium for the whole game. Those people get loud. They do the weird pointing at their arms and the gestures and their little fake military situation, whatever that is, the Corps Cadets or Cadet Corps, whatever they call themselves. I tell you what, they have a good time. We flew into Houston. We flew from Atlanta into Houston to get there and ran into several Auburn fans. By the way, a lot of readers, a few of them shouted you out, Lauren, so wanted to pass that along. Yeah, they're like, hey, you work with Lauren. I was like, yeah, I was on the video. Yeah, it's really great. So, that was kind of cool, and talked to a few of them on the way there and on the way back, and they said, hey, man, we enjoy the environment there. Their fans are loud, they're rowdy, but they're not, hateful. And they said they enjoyed going there on a road game than certain other places that I won't name, but you can probably piece that together, right?
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, well, it's a great place, great stadium. Obviously, the outcome for Auburn, not what they hoped it would be, falling to Texas A&M 20-3. Worst offensive output since the 2012 Iron Bowl, with its only score coming from Anders Carlson in the first quarter. So not great there. Just kind of looking at the landscape of things. So sort of an October to remember for this Auburn team, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Bo Nix had some big performances. And then to me, he struggled, but the offense as a whole just struggled. And it seems like they took a step back. And, I think Harsin, kind of pointed to it. He just said they didn't feel like they found that play, that momentum, that spark to really get the offense going. And, that was a big key piece. So just from your overall thoughts and takeaways when you watch the game unfold, what happened to this offense, man?
Well, a lot of it unfortunately started in the offensive line. Now, you didn't have Brandon Council missing, who was one of their top offensive linemen, and he was there. He dressed, but he did not participate very much or at all from what I saw, and that was a major loss, and it seemed to have an impact on the depth of the offensive line. And Texas A&M got a good defense. They got some houses, and those boys were moving. That one play where Nix fumbled it. Jaden Beebe is a big, big man with bad intentions who was chasing that man, and, he dropped it, and another bad man, Michael Clemens, came and picked that ball up and ran it for a touchdown. So, these are things that happen. But even at that point, it was still only a 9-3 game. Auburn's defense had really held firm against the Texas A&M offense that had scored a lot of points. They had held tight. They had held firm a few times in the red zone. Auburn, at one point, Texas A&M was 0-10 on third downs. But quite honestly, the problem with Auburn is they were 4 of 16 on third down conversions. And a lot of that starts with Auburn not being able to run the ball. Tank Bigsby had 64 yards on 15 carries. Unfortunately, Jarquez Hunter, he only had one carry for 15. One big carry for 15 yards. The other 3 carries didn't really go far, and that was pretty much it for your rushing attack. Nix got sacked several times. He was rushed. He was hurried. They just didn't look comfortable. And that loud environment there at College Station, College Station didn't help things either. It was very tough on them, and that offense just struggled all day.
Yeah. finding that spark, finding that momentum. And it was just, they couldn't get that juice going. And, Nick's, I think 20 for 41, 153 yards, the 2 turnovers.
You don't want him throwing 41 times.
What'd you say?
You don't want him throwing 41 times. You really don't want any quarterback throwing 41 times, which is very telling, because if you look at the wins against LSU and Ole Miss, LSU, Ole Miss, and Arkansas, he was more around between 25 to 30-ish in those range for passing attempts. You get him over 40, you create issues, particularly, you only had 2 catches from your wide receivers. Samuel Shanker, the tight end, led with 47 yards it was, which is why you only have 151 yards. You see that. Now, the interception, it was late in the game. I don't even count that one. They were pretty much out of it. I think it was like a little bit over 3 minutes left in the game when he threw that pick, just trying to just make something happen. At that point, they were down 20-3 already. 17-3 was led to the other field goal. But, the point is, they're going to have to find a way to create packages that give Nix a little bit more time, as well as create running lanes for Tank Bisley and Jarquez Hunter. Sean Shivers did do some good stuff, catching the ball out of the backfield, which, again, he was your second leading receiver.
Right. Yeah.
That ain't a recipe for success, Lauren.
Yeah, I definitely some work to be done. Some deficiencies showed up, especially when what we saw in the consistencies in October, now in November. Defensively, though, a bright spot for the Tigers. Obviously ended up, giving up, what was it, 4 field goals, and then the defense scored a touchdown for Texas A&M. So they did their job, but at the end of the day, it didn't translate to the win. The offense wasn't able to get it done. But just your thoughts on the defensive side of the football and what they showed you.
I thought they showed a lot. Texas A&M only scored 2 offensive points, and that was on a 2-point conversion. Because, again, the touchdown was scored by the defense. Their kicker was 4 for 5 for field goals. He missed 1. I thought the defense held up, particularly in the red zone. Now, depending on who you ask, there may be some methods to how Auburn got that done, at least on one of those drives. But from Auburn's perspective, they figured out ways when they were backed up against the wall to keep that Texas A&M offense out of the end zone, which kept that game close. It was a 3-3 game all through the first half, which somebody who's trying to write on deadline is like, okay, looking over at Tom Green, like, hey, man, what are we going to write about this here? And, talking to the few other guys who made the trip, is like, hey, guys, not a whole lot here. And even through the third quarter, it was 6-3 for a lot of it. Going into the fourth quarter, what was it, 9-3? The defense more than did its part. I guess maybe they could have got a turnover or two, maybe scored a touchdown on their own. But outside of that whole thing, there's much more the defense could have done.
Yeah, and I think Tom Green might have noted this too in his one of his posts. It was the first time Auburn's defense kept an SEC opponent out of the end zone since its win against Arkansas back in 2018. So, certainly a lot to hang your hat on there, and, a great performance for the defense, and they, can carry that into November with the rest of their schedule, which is kind of outlined like this: Mississippi State. They're at home back at Jordan-Hare Stadium, and then they go to South Carolina on November 20th. November 27th, back home. Iron Bowl will be certainly one to remember. Certainly excited for you to experience your first Iron Bowl.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it still. Obviously, it may not have the same implications as of yet. We will see, because Texas A&M got to go to Ole Miss next weekend. Yeah, and it's possible they could go there and lose. You don't know.
Still a lot of variables, which is really crazy the way college football is kind of working out right now.
But it's also
path to anything.
Well, but it's also the SEC. It's where you're at. It's what it is. When you have these teams, you think about when you beat Arkansas, you beat one of the better quarterbacks in the conference, KJ Jefferson. Oh, and by the way, the next week you got to go against Ole Miss's Matt Corral, who was a Heisman Trophy candidate up to that point. Oh, and then by the way, you got to go out to Kyle Field the next weekend. Oh, and then by the way, you got a Mississippi State team that beat that Texas A&M team before, that you got to come play in your house, where Coach Mike Leake is asking for kickers, because that's how close that game was against an Arkansas team that you beat. So who's better? Other than Georgia in the SEC, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful to Bama, but they have shown some flaws and some little weaknesses as well. Who's a team that you can honestly say every week you can count on? Yeah. And that's what makes it fun. And that's why
That's
we're
what
here.
makes it fun. You're absolutely right. Last question for you before we let you go, Nubias. So there's been this swirling conversation about the snap count that Jimbo Fisher commented on after the football game about Auburn potentially messing up their snap count. I want to get your thoughts. Just kind of lay it out for us. What's being said and what is your, I guess, perception of that? Because you said you went back and watched the game and have an opinion on that. So, yeah, just give us the layout of what we're talking about here.
Well, because here's the deal, right? So obviously the game's on CBS, and as this is unfolding, Jimbo had made, because basically how this works, Lauren, you've covered the game, so let me explain this for the readers. Typically speaking, when the Auburn players are doing their thing, talking to us, their coach, Jimbo Fisher, was doing his press conference. So they were in person, we were on Zoom, we're upstairs, but they pipe it through the press box. So You're able to hear Jimbo Fisher's comments while the players are talking. Auburn head coach Brian Harsin goes last, which is a little weird, but okay, whatever, that's fine. But I heard him like, wait a minute, what's he talking about with the snap count? And you could see him very demonstrative about it. And even when one of the other reporters asked, hey, were you frustrated about it? He's like, well, I'm not just frustrated. I'm going to call the conference office. And he's like, well, I wasn't moved for joking. And so basically what he's talking about, in the third quarter, they got down to by the Auburn 5. They had 2 pre-snap penalties back to back. Typically, Lauren, as you know, somebody who's watched a lot of football, it's kind of difficult to get two back-to-back pre-snap penalties. Mm-hmm. It's not easy to happen, but it happened in that situation. And for Jimbo, he got upset because he felt as though, from what he said, that Auburn was doing things, whether making sounds or slapping noises. And you know how we know? Because you go back and watch TV broadcasts, the CBS crew kind of hinted at it as well. They hinted at, well, maybe Auburn was making sounds or something.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? So obviously, they have these pre-show, these pregame meetings or whatever, and things may get discussed that we as beat writers may not be privy to, but Jimbo put it out in the spotlight. And so when you go back and do some looking, it's apparent that Jimbo feels that Auburn was doing something to basically simulate or mimic Texas A&M snap count, which then created a situation where they had the pre-snap penalty. And then when Jimbo talked to the officials said they didn't hear anything. And Jimbo's like, well, how didn't you hear anything? Because they heard it when it happened to them against Bama. And they got called for it on one of Bama's drives when they were trying to tie that game up. That obviously Texas A&M ended up winning on the field goal at the end there. So what he's saying is he feels like it's wrong from the conference perspective that he got called for. But then he said, well, when they were doing it, their players were clapping to get each other's attention. But when it was Auburn, they were doing it and it disrupted the snap count. Now, which is true? What is true? I don't know. I wasn't on the field. And when I went back and looked, I didn't see any Auburn players capping. Now, you can't read their mouths, obviously. You don't get that close on the broadcast.
Right.
But based upon the way the broadcast sounded, as well as other things, it seems as though this is something that Jimbo's been talking about.
Yeah. Well, certainly interesting. And, I imagine we might hear more later this week if he does, in fact, talk to the SEC office about it, and there is a complaint filed, so to speak, and what that looks like. So interesting notes there. And of course, obviously, we appreciate you breaking things down for us. Again, we will be ready for the upcoming week as Auburn takes on Mississippi State back at home, Jordan-Hare Stadium, 11 a.m. on ESPN. Nubias, I know you'll be there doing some things for us, making sure we're all up to date. So, of course, you can follow Nubias on Twitter, as well as our social media accounts. Of course, on AL.com, you can follow his stuff as we get you ready for the week. I know you've got Brian Harsin coming up with some comments there, so stay tuned for some of the comments from Coach Harsin and the players throughout the week. And we appreciate all of you guys for watching. We also appreciate our sponsor, Keep Alabama Beautiful. We'll check you next week.